Hello. Chapter 14 is on income mobility. So it's really interesting. This is a very interesting chapter regarding poverty in America and income mobility. So here's the highlights. What I would suggest doing is, well, you can read the chapter first and then watch this, or watch this and then read the chapter. But here's the highlights of the chapter. So in 1960, the poorest 20% of the households received only about 4% of the total income. We're talking about in the US. These percentages are still the same today. However, in the 1960s, 40 million or 22% of Americans lived in poverty. Today, 40 million Americans are still in poverty, but the percentage has dropped to 14%. So you might ask yourself, why are they focusing on the 1960s here? Why did they pick the 1960s? Well, the reason they did that is because in the 1960s, President Johnson announced the war on poverty and that he wanted to eradicate poverty in the US. So have we eradicated poverty? No, we've diminished it. It's still 40 million people, but we have a lot more than 40 million people in the country today. So the percentage has decreased from 22% to 14%. However, poverty in the 1960s is not the same as poverty today. Remember in chapter 1, where we talked about through free trade and technological advancements, it raises everyone's standard of living. So everybody's standard of living has been raised. So living in poverty today is not the same as living in poverty in the 1960s. Everybody has a much higher standard of living. Now, through free trade and through technology, we have a higher standard of living. Another reason why people in poverty today are wealthier or better off than poverty, than poverty in the 1960s, which we're talking, 60 years ago, is because of the items mentioned in number 2. Okay, so when they talk about poverty, they're only looking at the cash income. They're not looking at in-kind transfers. So since the 1960s, we have all these in-kind transfers, all right, that the taxpayers are paying for. So let's take a look at these. Medicare, Medicaid, subsidized housing, food stamps, free and reduced lunches, WIC, that's the women in, I think it's WIC is women and children. That's where you can get cheese and eggs and so forth and milk. Welfare, tax rebates, the child tax credit. So when you include all of these in-kind transfers, poverty has actually, according to the book, poverty has actually been cut in half. So, they did have some, of course, some in-kind transfers in the 1960s, but nothing to the magnitude that they have today. So, I'm not giving an opinion one way or the other. I think that we should pay for reduced or free lunches. Some families take advantage of that? Sure. But I don't know if you probably all remember what it's like to go to school as a kid, if you maybe didn't eat enough for breakfast and you're starving before lunchtime. I can remember that in elementary school, and you can't concentrate. So, there's no reason for anybody in America to be without food. We have so much food. So, I'm all for the reduced lunches, and I'm all for a hand up, but not a hand out. So I think we should give as much money as we can to helping people get an education so that they can better their lives. But clearly some of these things are, do not motivate people to work. So, but anyway, that's for, that was another chapter. So let me get off of that rant and just focus on this. So when you look at, the point of this is all of these in-kind transfers really make people seem wealthier than they are, than is being reported, because the poverty measure is not looking at these, it's only looking at the cash incomes. In addition, as I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture, real standards of living for those living below the poverty line have actually doubled since the 1960s. Okay, so yeah, of course we still have a problem with poverty. We do have income, a lot of income diversity. Let's see. Income inequality. We have a lot of income inequality. We're trying to, economists are trying to fix that. Of course, it'd be great if no one were living in poverty. Remember back from chapter 1, I talked about what have economists found that are two of the main ways that people can raise their standard of living. Well, education and hard work basically are the two things. Of course, life isn't fair, but through education or training, getting some kind of skill and hard work, you can raise your standard of living. And they also found neighborhoods to be one of the most important factors in that as well. So trying to get in the best neighborhood that you can helps, because that helps you get into good schools and so forth. But if you can't get in, if you're not in the best of neighborhoods, then, focus on education and hard work, instill that in your children. And so you can just look at different cultures. America is very diverse, and they talk about on page 96 how we're always going to have a lot of income inequality in America because we're so diverse. And they contrast America with Denmark. Denmark doesn't have a lot of income inequality. Well, basically Denmark's a welfare state, but also it's a very homogeneous group of people. And so you can just look at different cultures. We're a culture of immigrants. You can look at different cultures over time and see how those cultures, by and large, that value hard work and education, and also that pool their money and help each other out, the families, that pays off. And so if you look at, for example, the latest, well, this has been for the past few years, if you look at the median income in the US by race, it's not, whites are not at the top anymore. It used to be whites, and then Asians, Latin Americans, Hispanics rather, African Americans. The highest median income in the US now is Asian. Well, there's two reasons for that. One reason is the Asian culture values education and values hard work. And when you think of Asian, when they group Asians, they're talking about people from China, from Japan, and also includes India, Bangladesh, and so forth. So if you think about just a stereotype in general, if you think about the Asian culture, they're typically very hardworking. They value hard work. They value education, and that we've seen that now develop over the years. Now that they've been in this country for a while, those groups of immigrants, they're at the top of the ladder now with median income. Another reason why they're at the top of the ladder, I'm talking about household income. Well, those cultures tend to have, multi-generations in the same household. So you have more than two breadwinners as opposed to other cultures. So anyway, that's a fact when you look at the statistics now. And so you can, there are multi-generation families in some families, but it's by and large because of education and hard work. Okay, so let's go to number 3. There's several key factors in whether a person is likely to, quote unquote, move up in life. This is on page 94 and 95. So let's take a look at this. All right, so the first one is family structure. So that's kind of like what I was talking about with the different cultures, but what they mean by family structure is they're saying that growing up in a single parent household appears to be the most damaging to a person's prospects for upward mobility. Because if you're in a single parent household, it's a lot more stressful for the parent. They can't devote as much time to the kids. They don't have as much money. It's just, it's just not as optimal as a two-parent household on, typically on average. So anyway, growing up, that they find that family structure helps. Also, growing up in a neighborhood, the neighborhood is, neighborhoods are key too. Okay, and then social capital. They're saying here, upward mobility is higher in those communities with strong social networks. And so if, that this, you guys probably, most of you are too young to remember this, but when Clinton was president, a famous line that Hillary talked about when she was going to the schools and such, and Hillary said it takes a village. So meaning it takes a village to raise a child. It's not just the parent or the parents. And so social capital that's what they're talking about. Basically, it takes a village. So people who, participate in civic organizations, are involved in the community, those kinds of things, the social network. Okay, school, communities that have really good, of course, communities with the better schools, the students will be more successful, more socially mobile. And then inequality, okay, individuals, this one right here, individuals who grow up in communities where income is distributed relatively equally have a better chance where there's substantial income inequality. So basically, if you grow up in an area where you have most of the people are on the same socioeconomic status, where the income is evenly distributed, that's seen as a success factor also, which kind of doesn't make sense if it's a poor neighborhood. But I guess what they mean is if you have a typical middle class or working class, middle class, or a well-to-do neighborhood, it's going to be better than if you have a more diverse, I guess, more economic inequality in the neighborhood. All right, and then segregation. Let's see, why is that? Hang on a second. That is not seeing that in here. 6. Okay, hang on a minute. Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay. Of course, segregation is not good. So if you have segregation is linked to reduced upward mobility. So basically what they're saying is if we have, they found this to be present for both Black and white communities, but more predominantly for Black communities. If you have segregation, it doesn't bode well for upward mobility. It's better to have integration in the schools and so forth. All right, so that's the several key factors that they have in the book. Pages 94, 95, and 96. Segregation is on page 96. So make sure you read those. Okay, and then I mentioned this again in chapter 1, but it's up here. Other research has shown that grit, meaning determination, and neighborhoods to be two very important factors in moving up the socioeconomic ladder. So I'm going to add to this because I teach finance, as I told you at the beginning, probably when I went over the syllabus. And so how can you give your kids a better life than you have? How can you make a difference in your kids or your grandchildren's lives or make your life better? Well, study hard, go to school, study hard, or learn a skill and save your money, be frugal. Because if you start saving when you're young and you save on a regular basis, you will grow wealth. And you'll grow wealth. Your wealth will grow substantially. It'll compound exponentially. For example, just saving $5 a day. I think I already told you this, but let me repeat it. Just saving $5 a day, which is $150 a month, $1,800 a year from the time you're 20 until you're between 65 and 70, depending on the rate of return. From age 20 to age 65, if you make 10%, you've got over $1 million. If you make 8% every year, on average, from age 20 to age 70, you're a millionaire. From age 20 to 65, you have about 800 and some thousand. So that's super easy to do. And so it's really not rocket science. And if you save, if you have a habit of saving and not spending, that alone, because you have time on your side, will make life a lot easier for you, for your kids, and for your grandkids. Anyway, so that, I think that they, in my opinion, I mean, this is strictly an economics class, but these economists don't understand, or they don't think about finance. You also need to think about finance and saving. And then that's one way to help raise the economic status of you, definitely of your children and of your grandchildren. Okay, that's chapter 14, and I will see you next time.